Okay, we got Don now. Fantastic, and we are live on YouTube. I'm going to begin recording as well. Okay, I'd like to call this meeting of the Charter Revision Commission to order. Please rise for the pledge. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Right, I'm going to ask everyone, would you be able to mute yourself unless you're talking? Ruth actually had a really good suggestion that apparently on YouTube it was coming across as a little disjointed because the voice triggers the video to go to somebody. So if everyone could just place yourself on mute, I think you can do that by just pointing at your picture and the mute button pops up. So as always, just as an announcement, we are operating under Governor Lamont's Executive Order 7B, which enables us to do virtual meetings so long as we record them and are live on a platform. We are streaming live on YouTube, and of course, a recording of this will be available for all eternity afterwards on the city's website. And so with that, tonight, 2 agenda items. First, we are pleased to have on the phone with us the president of the Board of Aldermen, John Anglace, to come in and talk a little bit about some of the ideas that we had under consideration. He also submitted written testimony, which was forwarded on to all of you. And so we'll talk to John for the next half hour or so, and then we'll continue going through our list of ideas. We have successfully either accepted or rejected 18 ideas to date, and we have 28 more ideas to consider. So we will continue moving through those tonight. With that, John, welcome. And maybe we could, let's start off by talking about the Board of Aldermen and specifically the structure of it. We've had some proposals to increase the number of aldermen to either 9 or 10, with the basic concept being that Shelton has grown in population. And so as Shelton has grown in population, from 10 to 20 to 40,000, we still have 8 aldermen. And one of the thoughts was maybe there should be more aldermen and potentially 5 wards, or maybe we should elect the president of the Board of Aldermen at large. So all ideas that I saw your testimony, but maybe you can speak to a little bit for the commission.
Yeah, well, as I said, if you receive a request to change a structure such as the Board of Aldermen, there's got to be compelling reasons to do it. I just don't see growth in population or wanting to get, I don't see the rationale for offering this suggestion. I think the history of the Board of Aldermen, which I have been a part of it for the last 30 years, and I think the history is a much more compelling reason to stay the course. When I first was elected to the board, it was me and Ann Doherty. It was 4 wards then. Over the years, the size of the wards has fluctuated with the growth in population, but it's not such a monumental growth that 2 people representing the ward, it's not extremely manageable. And it's not that's not a compelling reason. Ann at the time was a Democrat and I was a Republican, and we got along fine. We worked fine. We did what we had to do and got our job done. I've seen the board with all Democrats. I've seen it with all Republicans. I've seen it with 50-50 split. I've seen it 6-2, 7-1. I guess every configuration over the years that you can think of, but it's worked. It has worked. We've conducted the city's business. And I just don't think I see, I would not recommend changing the current makeup of the Board of Aldermen.
Great, thank you, John. Other questions for John on the Board of Aldermen or its structure?
Do you want me to answer something?
No, I'm asking the other commissioners if they have any other questions on the Board of Aldermen.
Okay.
If not, then John, if you could talk to us a little bit about the idea of the technology committee, not only at a high level, but also you had suggestions for the makeup of it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I put in writing again the technology committee, and I put down why the need. That was my first thing I addressed. And I said, this pandemic has changed the way we live and work. It has also raised questions about how we provide city services going forward. This is an excellent time for us to engage in post-pandemic planning and taking advantage of the available technology to provide the improved and increased services expected by our citizens. Also, our Board of Education and other school districts have adopted the Chromebook learning approach. Their plan calls for a build-out of this system from 5th grade forward. Some of us believe that the cost of this system will escalate going forward. The Technology Committee would be an excellent body to oversee student results. At the present time, they have implemented a program, and despite several requests, I have not received anything from the Board of Education that shows us that the money we're spending for Chromebooks is getting results. They do not have a measuring system in place. The Technology Committee would be an excellent body to oversee this, to measure the system's value and plan for its ongoing funding. We cannot continue to fund, I see this, Chromebooks, I see them with a useful life of maybe 4 years. And if you're starting to populate the student population at grade 5 and going every year in the new grade 5 gets new books, well, those children that are in grade 5, those students, when they get the first year in high school, they're going to have to replace those. I think we've got to be realistic. We're going to have to replace those books because the technology changes so fast. And not only does it change, but they become obsolete. There's other things that happen. So wear and tear, et cetera. So I think you're really looking at populating the grade system at grade 5 and then repopulating it again at first year in high school. So I think you're probably going to be looking at not $250,000 a year, but $500,000 a year to keep this going. And I'm not arguing. I'm not arguing the value of the system or the quality. It may be well intended, it may be good. That's all we got to find out. But we've got to fund it. And the difficulty we have every year in funding it is that we are limited in the Board of Aldermen bonding. It's the only resource we have to fund capital improvements. And we can't put this into the budget. It's just wrong because it's a capital expense. And so we need to have a system in place that's going to be there to fund it once we commit to it. And we can't commit to it and then stop the program. I don't think that's realistic. So
Well, John,
I think technology is.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I say technology is here to stay. We need to embrace it in all aspects of government going forward. education is one form of government. There's a lot of things on the city side that we have to embrace it for, and we have to look into it, and we have to start making it user-friendly for people within the community. And we've got to have I think the technology committee is essential to our future growth. My thought was to build on our previous technology committee success, which was in place, and I served on that committee along with many people from the Board of Education and many people from the city. We had people from business and industry within the city, and if you might recall, we put in a wide area network and did a lot of other good things for over the 12 years. But when the appropriated money funded under the current charter, when we named the technology committee a building committee, and the $2.5 million that was approved by the voters gave us funding to go forward and to do what had to be done. When the funds ran out, the charter requires the committee be disbanded. So we haven't had a technology committee in many years now. I don't know how long it is, but many years. So then I turned my attention to the thought of what would the recommended makeup of a technology committee be, and I say recommended because this is, your thoughts are as good as mine. I'm just giving you a place to start. But I thought that maybe 3 members, and I say I'm building off the technology committee that was in place and ran successfully for 12 years. And I think everybody was pleased with the results. But I think we should have 3 members, voting members appointed by the Board of Aldermen, of which 1 or 2 should be from business or the industry sector, within the community, people that know technology, people that are going to be hiring the people that we're educating. 3 members appointed by the Board of Education, 1 from the teaching or administrative community, so that it's not, not all 3 members are Board of Education members. We want to try to get the users involved, the people that deal with this. 1 member appointed by the mayor, so that would give us 7. 1, the city IT director and the Board of Education IT director. So that would give us a total of 9 voting members, with 5 votes required for a majority. And then have the mayor and the superintendent serve as ex officio members. Then I would suggest a 2-year member appointment term. I would suggest that if recommended as part of the charter revision and approved by the voters, that a referendum be held to provide funding of at least $2.5 million, and the technology committee then be given the authority as a building committee by the Board of Aldermen to make expenditures. And those expenditures, the committee could put them together, and the committee as a building committee could spend them, or you could put another caveat in there that it's subject to the mayor, give the mayor the opportunity to veto all expenditures, just as a check and balance. And then I would charge the technology committee with responsibility to examine ways to provide public with service enhancements utilizing the IT platforms, and charge the technology committee with the responsibility to develop a 5-year IT plan, and charge the technology committee with IT security system responsibility, and provide the technology committee with the authority to examine any aspect of city government for possible IT improvement, just so that nobody says, well, you can't come in here. This is my territory. I think you got to give them that in the charter. And then charge the technology committee to find ways to do more with less. And those are my thoughts.
Great, John. Well,
Any questions?
yeah, before I open it up for questions, just two thoughts, right? One is, I like your idea on structuring it because one of the themes that we've had as a charter revision commission is finding ways to make city government work better, and opportunities for City Hall and the Board of Education to work hand in hand, I think are very powerful. It avoids the dynamic that we've seen over the course of the past few years. It has everybody in the same room rowing in the same direction. And on something as critical as technology, I like that. I like the proposal for the makeup of the board. Just the statement is just, I think, a legalese statement, which is, I think we're absolutely in our power to give the technology community money to spend and the authorization to spend it. The Board of Education, though, I think under state statutes is going to retain the right to be able to direct technology within the school system. So what does that mean? Well, with them having, seats at the table, hopefully nothing. But I think the practicality of it is the Board of Ed will still, under state statutes, be able to direct technology if they disagree with what the technology committee does. Is that right, or am I mistaken in that?
Well, if this committee has the
Okay.
financial capabilities of recommending what one does, that's where I guess if the board would have to go to this group to get things funded.
Yeah,
Well,
let me give an example. Maybe is that to the Chromebook example. Let's say the technology committee recommends that we're going to buy 3 Chromebooks for every classroom, and the Board of Education says we don't want Chromebooks, we want Macs. I don't know, I'm making it up, right? Like the Board of Education has the right; they can't spend any other money, but they have a right to say no if they don't like the direction it's heading in. Just want to make sure I'm right about that.
Dan?
Yeah.
The only thing the Board of Ed from the state level says that we must use computers for testing. So we need to have some kind of platform that will accept the testing from the state. I think they leave it up to the boards of ed how they want to do it. But I like John's plan, and I think we could separate the hardware issues from the software applications for education, and that would cover it. Because the administrators, the teachers, they recommend the curriculum software. Whereas now we have a department that's trying to focus on everything, and they're not certified teachers. So there's where the division lies. I think if we had a technology committee, you would be able to separate them, and the Board of Ed or any department actually would still have control over the specific applications that they need to run their department. But it would all funnel into this committee and this overseeing group for checks and balances, and you'd have a better handle on the money part of it. That's my thought.
Dan,
Go ahead, John.
Dan, this is John Angles. I want to remind everybody that one of the requirements of Executive Order 7B is that every time we speak, we have to announce in advance who we are.
Okay.
But that said, I want to draw on the experience from the last technology committee that we had. We had members of the Board of Education there. We had administrators there. We had Al Cameron as part of it, who was the finance director, and we had the technology director, the IT director, and yes, as Darlissa pointed out, the software was not on the table for discussion. That was all predetermined by the Board of Education, but it was the funding and the program that was up for determination by the technology committee, and the extent somebody mentioned earlier, the cooperation. It was unbelievable with it went among everybody. It brought everybody to the table. It gave everybody, representatives, of both the city and the Board of Ed. I mean, it was a different atmosphere at the table, and it was not. It was one where you could openly discuss things without people getting upset about them. You know what I mean? You can put things on the table and say, look, you got to understand our position and where we're coming from and what we're all about here. And it was done, in that committee forum, and it worked out fine. And we went forward and got things done that had to be done.
Darlene Ritter, I agree with John. I was on the steering committee for that technology plan as a part of the education group. And it worked out beautifully. There was a lot of cooperation between the different groups of people. It worked really well, and we had a good start for technology.
Right.
Yeah, John again. I'm sorry to dominate this thing, but I just want to point out that when people come to the technology committee, when they came to us with their plan, and obviously we had funding. We had a certain amount of funding. How were we best going to use this? Where were we going to best put this money to do the most good for the most people in the best places? And that's what the committee focused on, as opposed to the one, I like to have this, I like to have that. It'd be nice if we did this. That's not what they were about. That's not what the challenge was. The challenge was to do the most they could with what they had, and not to let money get in the way of carrying out a plan. But at the same token, measuring that and making sure that we got what we thought we were going to buy, and we get the results, and measure the students' results, so that we knew that the benefit was going to the students, that they were benefiting from it, and it was not just falling on. The money was well spent when we walked away and saw the results.
Great, John. Any other questions for John on this, or on any other topic you'd like to ask John about? All right, hearing none, John.
No, John, maybe you want to talk a little bit about, we were talking about increasing the bonding for the city, allowing the aldermen.
Yeah. I think I put that in my earlier written proposal, and I felt this way. We get a lot. We're by charter, we got 2% of the budget that we set every year. That amounts to a little over $2 million in capital spending, and it's tight. It's tight to do what we have to do. Vehicles for the police department, for public health. Not public health, for highways and bridges. And education needs, and all the other city departments that need vehicles or whatever they need, and fire department turnout gear, which is essential, and that's a capital expense. All these things, the 2,000, just 2 million, just about makes it, and we always end up leaving somebody short, and I thought that we're looking at the next 10 years. When you change the charter, what are we going to need in the next 10 years? The costs are going to go up, and 2 million isn't going to cut it. We're going to need to take that maybe to 3%, and probably about 3 million. And I think we could live with that I think we could manage that over the next 10 years.
Now, that's not adjusted with inflation, correct?
That's correct. That's correct. You can adjust it if you want, but the history is that if you make it 10 million a year, let me tell you something. They'll spend 10 million a year, and it will not be on the very best things. It'll be on what somebody thinks is good, and it's much better to have it tight and let people think twice before they spend it. I keep for the alderman, we keep a running account of what we've got, what we spend it on. I don't know if I submitted that to you with my comments, but I could give you and show you what the expenditures have been over the last several years, so that you got an idea of what we do with that money and how we spend it. It's all capital stuff. We have used some of it for textbooks and Chromebooks, but if we have a technology committee, we wouldn't do that. That would come under technology then.
Great. Other questions for John? Seeing none, John, first off, I just wanted to thank you for coming here tonight, and just thank you for all the thoughtful testimony you've submitted over the course of our deliberations. It's been exceedingly useful, and we really appreciate it, and just know how much we all appreciate your continued public service on the board. So thank you.
Yeah. Well, okay, and in return, I want to thank each one of you for serving on charter revision. It's a very important function. It only happens once every 10 years, but I understand we have some repeats. Thanks an awful lot for having me.
Thanks, John.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Good evening.
All right. Super useful. And a shout out to Ruth Ann for doing this twice.
Yeah.
All right, gang. So let me share my screen. What I wanted to do tonight was to actually kind of show you where we are in terms of about ideas. So we have at this point gone through 18 of our ideas and either said accept or reject, which leaves us with 28. So what I wanted to do tonight was walk through those 28. There are some of them that we asked for more information, and mea culpa, I've had a very busy week. I haven't had a chance to do my to-dos yet, but I will for next week. But there are other ones where we do have more information where we might be able to take action tonight. So let me walk through, and we'll go through each of these that are left, and then we can talk about it. So a couple of ones. So first off, we dealt with everything under appointments. We've dealt with that entire section. Term lengths, the ones that are left are obviously roped into the Board of Education discussion of whether it should be 2 or 4 years. So let's hold that for the Board of Ed discussion. The term lengths of various appointed boards should be standardized. I have a to-do to actually list out everything that's in the charter currently. Again, apologies, I haven't done that yet. So let's punt on that till I can do it. Similarly, library board should be reduced from 6 years to 4 years. Got to talk to Steve Bellis. Apologies, haven't done that. And P&Z should be 2-year terms, likely against state statutes, but I want to just double check that before we throw that out. But based on my initial read, I think that is against state statutes. So all that stuff I want to punt. Where I do want to go is stuff on voting. And so basically one of the ones that we punted on, but I wanted to return to, was the question of whether board members need to be present to vote. And where we had left this off, basically for all of us to think about, right, wasn't something we wanted more information on. The idea was to say, look, by charter, we are going to allow people to vote without being present. But we were going to leave it up to the Board of Aldermen to actually establish the actual requirements for that. So rather than write it into charter that you need a quorum to be physically present or that only certain types of technology are allowed, we were actually going to leave it up to the board to adopt that, thinking that, look, over the course of the next 10 years, technology is going to evolve. So let's not write something into the charter that's going to be permanent. Wanted to see if there was further thinking on that, or if you guys were feeling like we're in a place to approve that, or if you did want more information. Darlissa.
This is Darlisa, and I think that what we discussed was very favorable. I think with the Board of Aldermen ordinances, that would take care of that. I do, however, really think we need executive sessions to be live and present. We can't take a chance and have, private information out there on a train, a plane, a boat. Executive session is designed as a private meeting, and I think that needs to be stated. And the rest of it, I'm good with.
Yes, it's a good point. We did say that executive session must be live and present. I didn't say that. That was on the page.
Yeah.
Other thoughts on that, or does anybody want to take a different tack than that?
This is Ruth. I agree with Darlissa. I did a little research on the FOI site regarding telephonic meetings, and there is nothing that prohibits telephonic vote. Didn't say that you have to have, it explains the meetings itself. If you're having people participate, that wherever the majority of the people are, the people in the room need to be able to clearly hear that person. They don't need to be able to see them, but they need to clearly hear that person. So, but it also, there was a lot of, other than the state legislature, which doesn't allow it, a lot of the state commissions they kind of put their own rules forth, if you will, whether they allow it or not. So they can disallow voting by telephonic, or, but I think I agree with Darlissa in putting it in the charter or as an ordinance that's consistent across the board. And certainly include the fact that, executive session, you cannot participate via telephone.
Great. Other thoughts? Okay, are folks okay with me moving this to the approved bucket then? And obviously we'll work on the language like we will with everything else.
Yes.
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 All right, moving that to accept. All right, and then the next two. So the next two were about quorum. And one idea was to say we should define quorum and what that means for various boards and commissions. So right now, most commissions are operating under Robert's rules. Every commission can adopt their own rules that's not established in the charter. But if you're operating under Robert's rules, you inherently are saying that quorum is 50% plus one of your members. Whereas idea number 3 is right now the Board of Aldermen, you need to pass something with 5 votes. Regardless of how many people are present, you need 5 positive votes to pass. And so the question is, do we want to make that all consistent? Do we kind of want to leave it as it is? Because right now, obviously, the Board of Aldermen has a different standard than most of our other boards and commissions do in terms of passing something.
I kind of think it all should be consistent. And if we're going to allow people to vote remotely, then, I don't think it's too hard to get a quorum.
Yeah, so which way would you go, Garrett? Do you want to say it is per Robert's rules where you need, just with a duly posted meeting, you need 50% plus 1? Or do you want to say absolute majority? You need, if the commission's 9 members, you need 5 votes to pass, regardless of how many people are present.
No, I guess Robert's rules is of people that are present and voting, correct?
Correct. Present and voting. That's Robert's rules. The Board of Aldermen currently has a higher standard, right? It's an absolute majority of the members, regardless of how many are present.
I mean, if they were voting on an ordinance, maybe that would be the case. Because that's putting something into law.
Mhm.
But if they were gonna pass, I don't know, an appointment, you know, you put up an appointment, the mayor appoints somebody and the board has to ratify it, you need 5 votes. And if 4 showed up, you know, 3, there's 3, you know, kind of do it. I would think that wouldn't matter much. And the only, you know, probably the only thing I would think of is an ordinance
Or the budget.
or the budget.
What other folks think about that?
Well, now this is Darlene again, now they go by majority most of the time, don't they?
They do. Tom Harbison had brought up a case where they're actually, they needed, they had a quorum, but they needed 5 votes to pass something. And I think it was like 4-1 or something, and it failed because you need 5 votes to pass. So that's just you know, it's a higher standard that's on the Board of Aldermen right now than on the rest of the boards and commissions.
Except planning and zoning. Planning and zoning.
Simply because planning and zoning needs a 2/3 right now, right, Ruth?
For certain things, right? So, right, any kind of zone change requires. But a simple application does not require, it's just of those present.
Yep. So let me,
Is
go ahead, Ruth Ann.
I was just gonna say, is that in the charter for the planning and zoning?
No, I don't think.
Or how do they decide?
That's a state statute thing, isn't it, Ruth?
Yeah, I believe it's state statute.
Some things you need this many votes and some things you need another, so. It makes it kind of
Exactly.
up to-
Good, so let me make a suggestion based on, let's actually not define what's in a plan, right? We'll let every board decide for themselves, except for the Board of Aldermen, where we'll say that, that it can be, or actually, no, I'm gonna change my mind on that. Let's actually define it, because I'm thinking about how we structure this. The Board of Education and Planning and Zoning are governed by state statutes, so we don't have to worry about them. We have to worry about the Board of Aldermen and appointed boards. And so I think for appointed boards, we say it's a majority present and voting. And for the Board of Aldermen, it's a majority present and voting, except in the cases of ordinances and budgets, in which case you need 5 votes to pass. Does that make sense?
Is that based on the 5 votes, based on the number of people on the board?
Yeah, I'm assuming we continue with 8. Obviously, if we change,
Well, that's what I was wondering, okay.
right, so if we get, when we get to that point, if we change it to 10, we would change it to 6.
Oh, okay, okay.
So let me write this down and you guys react to this. So for appointed boards, quorum shall be defined as majority plus 1 to conduct business. And for the Board of Aldermen, for ordinances and budget, an absolute majority of 5 votes is necessary to pass. For anything else, a majority of those present.
Is it?
And voting.
Dan, it's Darlisa again. I think for the Board of Ed on number 2, we need to have majority present to vote items also.
And that's why I actually don't, I want to define this just for appointed boards.
Okay,
The Board of Ed and P and Z are just going to be governed by state statute, and I don't want to, I don't want to interfere with those. I'm really thinking about Parks and Rec, things like that. And then Board of Aldermen is obviously Board of Aldermen.
okay.
The charter actually does outline the quorum for the Board of Aldermen,
Yes,
but it does not for planning and zoning.
right.
So it's a state statute of regulation, what requires a quorum when you're voting on zoning matters.
I believe the same is true for Board of Education. So do you guys want to mull on this more for next meeting? Do you like this? I'm comfortable either way.
What was the motivation for this originally?
So it came from the Tom Harbison's testimony at the public hearing, right? Where it was kind of like, it's too high a standard for the Board of Aldermen, right? Like literally, I think we're by putting this in, we're changing nothing for appointed boards and commissions, like nothing practically. We're just putting it in the charter. And for Board of Aldermen, we're saying you only need that absolute majority for ordinances and budget.
So I guess the only concern I have is that it's not, I don't think we've mentioned this to any of the meeting participants, have we? Have we mentioned this to Mark, or have we mentioned it to John, or?
I don't believe so.
So it's kind of like, I think we probably want to touch base with them just to make sure that we're not.
Fixing something that's not broken.
Yep.
I was just gonna say that.
Yes, or second order consequences, right? So let's ask, especially on the Board of Aldermen, let's ask John Anglaise. I won't ask him to come back, but I'll shoot him an email. And on the other ones, I don't know if I don't feel strongly about this, right? I could go either way. I think it's what we're proposing here is logical, but again, nothing's broke, don't fix it. Don't know the second order consequences of this. So let's keep these as open items for now, and we'll come back. Okay. Board of Education, yeah, I owe you guys examples of some of the voting where you can vote for less than the number of seats there are. So I got to get back to you with that. Budget. All right, couple on the budget that I thought we can move on. So one is, we had talked about this, and the number 2 here, that the Board of Aldermen may establish standards for budget submissions for all departments, including the Board of Education, that they must adhere to. And we had said last time we talked about this, we all kind of liked it, but also said, hey, this is actually already happening, that there actually are discussions going on between the BOA and BOE about what the format should be. And so the question was, is this necessary? And so I'll open it to I have an opinion, but I'll open it to the floor of folks, whether you like putting something like this in charter or whether you just want to leave it up to the Board of Aldermen and Board of Education to work out.
I think it's a management function. I don't think it belongs in the charter.
Other thoughts? So John, I'll do the other side. I actually do see your point. It's a management function. The issue from a budgetary perspective has always been the Board of Education is under no obligation right now to submit any form. And so their budget always looks different than everybody else's budget. And from a budgetary standpoint, it's hard to compare apples and oranges. And maybe the Board of Ed would argue we are apples and oranges, right? And that we should be different. My opinion on this one is I'm okay with the Board of Aldermen giving them the power to establish standards. And then if they work it out with the Board of Ed, great. But if they don't for some reason, enforcing those standards to me is a good idea. But again, I'm not going to fall on the sword for this one.
Darlisa here. Yes, I agree. Every time we change a finance director, they all have specific programs and ways that they want to outline our budget. And I think a standard budget submission process and plan would be easier for everyone to understand. I just think it should be consistent for everybody. So if the Board of Aldermen say this is what we're using, then the Board of Ed should go along with it. This will reflect back on the technology committee also. Should we vote to establish a technology committee, that will force the standardization across the board. But until that time, you know, how long will that take? We should probably have something in the charter that will cover it. And we could actually say a statement that says, until the technology committee establishes some form of a format or standardization, if we go with the technology committee. That's my thought off the top of my head.
Great, thanks, Joe. Other thoughts on this one?
And it's Dave. Other than, well, what I want to say is there are issues in the past that have come up that have brought us to this situation of talking about this? Or was it just for consistency?
I think it's for consistency. I can speak from my experience, but my experience is dated. You know, my experience was the Board of Ed would come with, you know, like, for example, personnel. They would have their own way of reflecting the personnel budget that they have, which obviously is a huge, huge part of the Board of Education budget. That just didn't give the same apples to apples comparison that if you're on the alderman and you're saying, do I want to hire another teacher or do I want to hire somebody else in the parks department, right? Making that up didn't make it easy to compare the two. The other thing that happened was there wasn't consistency in the non-personnel budget items. So there would be areas where the Board of Education would call it one thing, the city would call it another thing, and it would just be very confusing to be like, okay, well, do you mean that this is this, or like what, like just the nomenclature was different. So I remember there was just a lot of time spent in figuring that stuff out. Again, I could buy Don's argument that that's just a management function and they should work it out. But if there's no forcing mechanism, I don't know if there's a guarantee that they will.
Well, you hear the new buzzword is transparency.
Mm.
You know, so, you know, kind of making it consistent. I think, you know, that makes it easier for everybody to understand the budget. And maybe that's a good thing.
I agree with Gary.
I agree too.
Don, what do you, are you okay with that, Don, or do you like?
Oh, I'll go. Oh, sure. I'll go wherever you want to go. I just don't, you know, budgeting systems in this town are archaic.
Very much so.
Municipalities had superior systems 45 years ago around the country.
Oh, God.
You heard words like program planning, budgeting, and management by objectives, and zero-based budgeting. And I mean, I guess when you're dealing with something that is what it is, I'd rather be a little eclectic with it, let them kind of be creative with it and see if you can't bring it together. But again, I'll go any way you want to go with it. I don't have any strong.
You know what, though? There's no reason why we can't, you know, put the language in the charter that the Board of Aldermen shall work with the Board of Education to establish these standards, but ultimately the Board of Aldermen has the right to establish them.
I like that idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I like that as well.
Together to come up with a standard for budget submissions. Within the event of disagreement, the Board of Ed shall have the right
Standards.
for all the budgets. People okay with that?
Yep.
Yes. Okay, and again, we're not at speak now or have forever hold your peace. So if people change their minds, you can always come back. All right, next one that I think we can deal with tonight is, and it's just a question of how we want to deal with it, is, you know, with the purchasing agent saying that, hey, there is a, you know, the standards for when you need 1 quote, 3 quotes versus going out to bid are too low. One of the things that I found in looking at other towns is that about half of them don't establish numbers in their charters. They actually just say that their legislative body will set the numbers for 1 quote, 3 quotes, and going out to bid. So giving that flexibility to the legislative body. The question for us is, do we like that idea? And if so, we can do that. If not, and we need numbers, I got to do a little more research because I've only gone through about half of the towns in terms of this one. So I think it's up to us is, do we want to leave that flexibility to the Board of Aldermen with the trade-off that comes with, right? The positive being flexibility, the con being that they could set that really, really high if they wanted to, right? Such that there's no need to bid. Question to you guys about where do you want to take this one?
Well, Darlisa, again, can we have a combination of that? Because I can understand needing more than one quote in some circumstances, like the roof on Sunnyside School. And yet I can understand totally one quote for maybe the gardening for Parks and Recreation. So perhaps we just need to come up with wording that will combine, make some kind of compromise between it.
Well, I think the question is going to be, you're going to want to be consistent, right, with the number, like the actual numbers. It's just a question of, do we want to set those numbers in charter or leave it up to ordinance? And that's the question. I don't know if there's an in between, because you don't want different numbers for different types of things. Like
Yeah.
I think it's just a question of, do we want to give the Board of Aldermen flexibility there to set those levels, or do we want to set them?
I think we should set them. I'm all for the flexibility. I think we ought to bump these numbers. Bonding as well, but I think we should set them.
Good. Other opinions? I don't feel strongly on this one. That's why I'm looking for your guys' guidance. I see the argument both ways.
So I would just question if you're going to do it in the charter, which only gets adjusted every 10 years, rather than an ordinance, where if it's something's not working or something we hadn't thought of comes up, that the ordinance is easier to change, correct?
That is correct. The Board of Aldermen can change the ordinance versus you need an amendment to the charter, which needs a referendum.
I could go either way.
Sounds like an ordinance give us more flexibility.
Yes, I agree.
Again, if you guys want me to punt and like, because again, we don't have to answer this one tonight. If you want me just to get the information for all the other towns and we look at that, I'm comfortable with that. Because I think we're all in agreement that either we're going to bump these numbers or we're going to give them flexibility. I don't think we're going to keep them where they are.
Right.
Could we just set a threshold for the final one? Like anything over, what is that, 25,000 or some number, it has to go out to bid? And anything else, the alderman, could set the guidelines.
Yes, that's what I was trying to express. Thank you, Don.
Sorry, Darlissa, I didn't understand. We could do that. Yes, we could.
I'm in favor of that.
Me too.
Don,
That's
shake.
No objection either way. So, I mean, whichever way you want to go, as far as I'm concerned.
So let's do this. So I like that. Let me write this down, right? So we're talking about setting level for going out to bid in charter, leaving other levels to Board of A ordinance.
Mhm.
And do you guys want me to, I think I should finish the swing on the research then to actually say, hey, here's how much other towns are doing to go out to bid, so we can have a frame of reference to set the number.
Okay.
Yes, good idea.
Good. So I'll finish that up and I'll have that for next week so we can finish this one. But I'm comfortable with that. Okay, and the next one, which I got to go back to the purchasing agent. Sorry, I just haven't done that. This question of least cost, most responsible, right? Like, did we come up with that? Is that a legal term? And do we switch it to most responsible or give a check and balance, right? To say that, hey, we go with the least cost unless it's approved by the Board of Aldermen. I just got to get us more information on that. The notice requirements, again, I got to get more information on this one about whether it was forcing us to do this. It's not an FOI issue. I know that, but I don't know if there's another issue forcing us to do that. I'm actually going to talk to Jack Basher about that. I think he's going to be able to help us.
Dan, why did you say it's not a FOI issue?
Oh, there was nothing in FOI. I looked at FOI and I saw nothing in FOI having to do with requiring you to place your bids in a particular location, right? Like this was the question of, can we put it on the website rather than in the paper? And there was nothing in FOI that talked about it. That doesn't mean there's not a statute somewhere that says we have to do it or something else.
Okay.
So that's why I just want to, like, before we put it in there, I want to understand, well, why did we do it this way in the first place, right? Is it just
Dan, why do we have to put it in? If it's in state statutes, then we'll have to do it.
right? That's right. If it's in state statutes, we have to do it. I just don't know if it's in state statutes.
Right. So why put it in and requiring our purchasing agent to do something? Because state statutes could change and our requirement, would be in here.
That is a good point. That is a good point, Gary. That is a good point. So yeah, so I mean, I agree. Look, I'm all in favor of doing this if we're allowed to do it. And so that being silent on it might be where we go, Gary.
Hey, Dan. Did we
Whoops.
lose Dan?
We lost somebody there. Or I did anyways.
Hey, Dan,
Yeah, Don.
could you scroll back just to that one before this number 4? I can't see it.
The least cost most responsible.
You know, I think that term, we talked about that I think that term was lowest responsible bidder. And I think that, again, I think it's good to have language to this effect, but I think in terms of setting up the methodology to achieve it, I think they've got to do it. Again, I think if you're going to get into this issue, you got to pre-qualify bidders. They should come in it's a management function, but I mean, it should be up to them how they do it.
Them being the Board of Aldermen.
That would be administratively, I would think.
The purchasing agent.
Purchasing agent.
Yeah, I think the charter could basically codify it, but I think that they would have to come up with the methodology, so.
Got it. Okay, so we'll return to these ones once we get a little more information on them. I don't disagree with anything you just said, Don. All right, one we heard from John tonight, and thank you, Gary, for asking it, was the level to trigger a referendum. And I'm getting more information on what other towns do. Again, I've gotten about half of them so far. I've gone through half the charters on this one. And the answer is it's all over the place, right? Like some towns don't give their legislative body an inch of freedom. If they're bonding, they go to referendum or town meeting. Other places give them quite a bit of leeway. I think you heard John tonight say that, moving this to either 3% or 3 million was the number he said was something that he would like to see. Again, I might advise that we finish the swing on seeing what other towns do, but if you guys want to move forward with a number tonight, that's totally up to you.
What's our budget?
I think it's about 100 million right now. Is that right? There's about $2 million in.
Well, it's a little over 100 million. So we're basically suggesting to go up to 3%, which is a little over 3 million.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Ruth Ann. Well, I'm going to show you.
I was just gonna say either maybe 3.5%, or because I think 3 million down 10 years down the road is not gonna be as much money as they might need. So I think either 3.5%, maybe even 4%. I mean, we're only probably going up, well, our budget's going to increase too, but I think just inflationary purposes, I don't think 3 million is going to be enough.
Darlisa, I agree with you, Ruth Ann. I would like to see perhaps 3.5 now, and then in 5 years, let charter set it at 4%.
Good idea.
So here's what, just so you guys can see it, here's what other towns do right now. So you can see just in the first two, the contrast. Ansonia, any bonding has to go to a referendum. Bridgeport, the city council could approve any form of bonding, right? So it ranges from, you know, from the trigger is 0 to there is no trigger. Others are like, you know, Danbury goes 3 million. They actually have a number 3 million, and they say that the city council can do it without referendum if they have a 2/3 vote. You know, Darien, the RTM can do it, but reversed by referendum, right? So you can see, like, I'm only, you know, halfway through here, but it's a little bit all over the place.
Yeah.
I lost you there a little bit, Dan. I mean, it says in Danbury, which is probably the one we're probably going to model after, they have a 2/3 vote.
Correct. For up to 3 million. So Danbury has the double check, right? They say, yep, your city council can go up to 3 million, but only with a 2/3 vote. If it's less than 2/3, you got to go to referendum.
So is that any, I don't know how to read that. Is that any one item? So if we were going to spend $1 million, they would just spend it? Because ours is a bonding limit.
Right, no, so is Danbury. Danbury is a bonding limit.
They have a limit, so for that one calendar year, their council could only bond $3 million. So for whatever we
Right.
call aldermanic bonding would be no more than 3% or 3.5% or whatever we decide.
Yep.
Okay. And if they were to go out for a bonding project, do you feel that it's a simple majority or 2/3?
Well, it depends on so my opinion, you may create a 2-tier system. You may actually say that they can bond. Hi there. What do you think?
All right. Good night, honey.
If you had given an answer, I would have gone with it. Maybe we have a 2-tier system here, just thinking about it. Maybe you actually say that with a simple majority, they can go up to 2 million, current number. And then you say with 2/3, they can go up to 4% of the budget, right? Set a high number, but also make that a 2/3 majority so it represents a super majority. And then after that, if it's above 4%, you got to go out to referendum.
Referendum.
I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. I just thought of that.
I think that's a good compromise too, Dan.
I like that idea as well.
Let's mull that over for next time.
Yeah, let's, well, then what other, Don, Gary, Ruth, Dave, what do you guys think?
I'm thinking.
I like just having a number and then deciding whether you want to make it a majority vote or a super majority.
Yeah, you don't like the 2-tier?
Not in love with it. Sorry, Dan.
I'm all right. I just thought of it right now. So I think, I mean, on this one, we're definitely going to raise it. I think we're all in favor of raising it.
Yes.
Just 1, 2. And I can finish the swing on other towns. I don't think it's going to tell us anything because they are going to be all over the place. I think this is literally a question of the trade-off of how much flexibility do we want to give to the Board of Aldermen without the check and balance of a referendum.
How long has the limit been? How long has the limit been 2%?
Good question. I don't know the answer to that. Did we change, Ruth or Sophia, did we change that last time, or was that still at 2% in the last iteration of the charter?
I don't
20 years at
recall. Yeah.
Hold on, I'm gonna look at the last strike through to see if that was ever changed.
Okay.
While he's looking at that, we'll keep this one open and just move to the next one. Where, in looking at other towns, we had a question of, do we want to separate out roads, right? Under the thought that roads are just something that have to be done. And maybe we don't, maybe we can allow the Board of Aldermen to do roads without a referendum. And the question was, do any other towns do this? Again, I'm only halfway through, but the answer is no. I haven't seen any other town so far that has a separate bonding trigger for roads. Doesn't mean you can't do it. This means I haven't seen another example.
So Dan, this is Gary, what you're saying is we would have, you know, say a 3.5% for bonding, then another X% for roads?
That was the idea. That was the idea. It's, I forget where it came from, or who came up with it, but it was the idea that, look, roads is just a cost of doing business. It's something we always have to do. Maybe you separate that out.
I think if you're going to rate,
Oh,
go ahead. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, did we have the discussion with the mayor or the finance director? Did that get brought up, the actual road issue?
I'd honestly have to go back and look. I don't remember.
Okay, I don't remember.
I don't remember also. I think if you're going to go up to a higher number, you know, I'm not sure the alderman should be at 5 or 6. You know, what John's saying is that, you know, whatever number that is, that's what they're going to probably figure out a way of spending.
But, well, he used 10, but I thought that was kind of excessive.
Again, I personally don't feel strongly on this one. You know, as I think about it and hear you guys, I kind of like what Don is saying is like, keep it clean, right? So like, it's either make it a really, you know, make it a 4 or 5% number, but trigger it at 2/3. Say you need a 2/3 vote, or make it a lower number, like 3 or 4%, and have it just stay as a majority, and don't separate out roads, because, you know, we're giving them more leeway. But again, I could be convinced on this one.
Dan, it still says 2% back in 2008,
Good, thank you, Sophia.
but it's under 7.16 borrowing, not 7.15.
Oh, might be my error.
Yeah, because 7.15 is petty cash.
Got it. Hopefully it's not under there.
So it's been 2% for a long time.
For a long time.
It's too low.
And that was never even changed back in 2008.
Yeah, I think we're all in favor of going up.
Yeah, yes.
Ruth Ann, I don't even think that was even brought up.
I don't think it was. I don't recall it being brought up at
No,
all.
I'm going back to 2008 and then the 2012.
So let me suggest this. Do people prefer, I'm going to create a false choice for you. Do people prefer going to 3%, but just leaving it as a majority, or going higher and requiring a 2/3 vote?
I like the higher,
You like a higher?
or 4% majority.
I do.
I'd
I like
encourage-
the higher too, 4%, 2/3 vote, or whatever, majority vote.
I like the combination one, put it at 3%, and then any more go for the 2/3 vote.
I agree with that.
Okay. Do people, so I heard some people say, so I heard a general consensus to have a higher number, like 4%. But then I heard some people say do a tier, and I heard other people say don't do a tier. David, feel strongly on this one way or the other?
I think if you're gonna double it, even though it's got to be a reasonable number after all these years of being stuck. I think if you're going to double it, you probably want to impose a higher standard in the vote. You know, if you pump, like you said initially, if you pump it to 3, then you can go to, you know, the basic majority vote. But if you're going to go to 4, I think you probably want to hold it to a higher standard.
I agree with you, Don, actually. I'm actually comfortable with going to 4 2/3, right? Because look, let's go to political philosophy for a second, right? We are actually saying that the referendum is there as a check and balance spending for the legislative body. And so if we want to get around that check and balance, we're requiring a supermajority. We're saying that our elected officials are in much greater than majority. And let's say again, we keep it at 8. We're actually saying that you need 6 out of 8 to actually pass that bonding. That makes a lot of sense to me. That makes a lot of sense to me from a political philosophy standpoint.
So if you
I
were gonna
agree.
go, if you were gonna borrow $100,000 for police cars, for argument's sake, you would need a supermajority for that?
You would
Or-
under what we're saying, but practically how this works, Garrett, from what we've been told, is this happens as one package at the end of the year, right? It's like, it's not how, maybe there's,
Or beginning of the year, yeah, I got it, okay.
right? I'm also, look, I'm also comfortable, like, I'm fully aligned with what Don said. I'm also comfortable moving to 3 and keeping it as a majority. I'm comfortable with either of those proposals. Just like if we're going to double it, it does feel like we should have a higher standard from a political philosophy standpoint.
I mean, I know the governor, in today's times did allow chief elected officials or their finance or board of aldermen to go out and do some borrowing.
He did.
I didn't see what that was. I'm just, going by what I heard. And I don't know. And I've always liked the idea of what they did. They didn't go out to bond. They went out and borrowed from a bank, and if an emergency happened and something happened, I think you want to give the aldermen some flexibility to be able to do that.
Let's do this. Let's everybody sleep on this one. So we're talking like 3% at a majority, or 4% with 2/3, or maybe tiered, right? Like,
Yeah.
let's actually sleep on this one, right? The one I want to get rid of, unless anybody feels strongly about it, is we know we're going to raise this thing. Do we need a separate bonding trigger for roads, or should we just keep this simple?
I'd keep it simple.
I think keep it simple too. Does anybody want to argue for the separate bonding trigger for roads?
No.
Hearing none, we're going to reject this one.
Mhm.
And everybody think about the other one more, and we'll come back to it and see what we want to raise it to. Okay. Keep going. So a couple other ones I owe you is state of emergency clause. Other charters do have this, so I just have to copy and paste them into a document for you so you guys can see it. Generally, the powers have to do, they're either vaguely defined or they specifically have to do with circumventing the budget or referendum process, right? So in towns that have very strict referendum things for bonding or require going to a town meeting for spending, they actually allow the legislative body or the executive to go around that. And so we may want to consider something similar, right? Obviously, we don't have a town meeting. We're raising the standard for referendum, but something to think about. I'll bring that to the next meeting. The next one we might be able to decide on tonight is the question of, do we want to give the mayor in particular, or the board of aldermen, the ability to extend the time that the Board of Education or any department has to submit their budget. The thought being that very specifically with the Board of Ed, it's very complex. They needed 2 extra weeks this year. Do we want to write that into the charter or no? I think we had a favorable disposition to this, but didn't come to a conclusion.
More time to submit their budget.
I'm okay with it, as long as if mayor approves, they have to submit to the mayor first before the board, correct?
That's correct. So are people comfortable with that, saying the mayor can give dispensation from the timeline?
Yes.
I'm okay with that.
Me too.
And so one of the other things, guys, that we didn't talk about, but you'll see this is one of those things you get into with writing, is the actual submission date is also going to shift by a month, because getting rid of the Board of A&T takes out a month from the process, right? So we're going to be able to say, rather than, I think it's right now, February 15th, they have to submit to the mayor, it's going to become March 15th because there's no A&T process anymore. So that's not, I agree with you. I actually think we should accept this one. That's more of an FYI that as we get into the actual changing the language of the charter, that's one of those secondary consequences that you'll see as we get into the language. Okay. That's an accept. All right. That was it with budget. All right, structure and composition. Start off with what we talked to John about tonight, the Board of Aldermen. So John was quite clearly against the idea of expanding the Board of Aldermen. Also, inherently, he didn't address the at-large concept, but my sense from John is he was kind of like, hey, it's working well, don't change it. What do folks think? Do folks want to talk about either increasing the number of wards or having at-large aldermen, or are we satisfied that things are working well the way they are?
Lisa again. I think leave it the way it is. I think it's working well. And items 2 and 3 1, 2, and 3 kind of go together. I mean, they become moot issues as you go down the list. So if we rejected number 1, then I think we have to logically get rid of number 2 and 3.
Other thought?
Are the number of aldermen that we have consistent in each ward, consistent with surrounding towns insofar as population?
That's a good question, Dave. I actually have not done a per population. It ranges wildly though, right? Because you look at some towns with like a representative town meeting, and they have, 1 per like 30 voters, right, down in Greenwich, right? Our aldermen are by and large, 2 aldermen are representing 10,000 people by and large. So, you look at comparable cities like Danbury, where I think they have 21 people on their council. Danbury probably has double our population. So they're a little more, or they have a little less representation per councilman. I can do that analysis if you're interested in it. It's easy enough to do. I want to gauge your guys' appetite for this. If the answer, like, I don't want to do the work if everybody's answer is no, right? But I actually, despite what John said, I'm actually open to number 2. Number 3, I don't think we need. I think there is an argument for number 2, but I don't feel super strongly about it. I wanted to see what you guys thought.
I agree with you, Dan, but maybe it's not the time to make the change.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Unless somebody felt really strongly that they wanted to increase the Board of Aldermen, then I'll do the analysis. But if nobody feels, because I don't feel strongly about it, I just see the argument for it. If somebody wants me to do the analysis, I will. Otherwise, let's reject it.
Mhm. Agreed.
I agree.
I agree too.
Okay, I'm all right with that too.
Okay.
Okay.
Leave Board of Aldermen as it is. Okay, Board of Education. See if we're gonna, Gary, we had it to do, to look to on this one. We had rejected the expanding to 12. The three that we still had on the table, and we had the nonpartisan, expand the maximum to 6, or do a Milford-esque elect by ward, which gets rid of the minority representation. We had it as a to-do to go talk to folks in Berlin to see how it actually worked. And did you get a chance to do that, Gary, or not yet?
I did. I spoke to a gentleman named Peter Rosso. He's a former Democratic state representative. He's a present member of the council.
Good night, honey.
And he was on their charter commission a couple times. So he's probably a pretty good resource. Basically what he told me with the history, he thought that both Hartford and Berlin were the only two towns that did this, and Hartford has changed back. So I think Berlin's the only one. He would not recommend to do it. He says it sounds good, but it's really not that practical. You know, he kind of preferred the team approach. In just having a conversation, I guess, the same situations that are in Shelton are probably over there, which is in most towns where the council and the Board of Education are usually not on the same page. And then, going back and reading, what was brought out with how they do it, it's still an interesting concept. Berlin, they vote for 3 people every year.
We did lean him back.
So it's a 3-year term. So they have, three people are replaced every year. So they have a total of 9. And 3 get elected every year. I guess the parties put up a number. It goes on a different ballot or a different line with no number. And I guess it's kind of easy to put somebody else's name up. I've been mulling it over if I kind of like the idea. Politically, it creates an election every year. I would think that if a group, puts money up, they probably can elect 3 people kind of easily. If you ran a campaign.
Yeah. Question: have they found have they found that in reality, people are R's and D's? Do they actually get one-party dominance on the Board of Education, or is that something that hasn't occurred?
I really didn't get into that. It just, I didn't ask that question if one party dominates. It's, Berlin's is controlled by the Democrats, and the gentleman I spoke to is a Democrat, and just felt pretty strongly if he had to do this over, he wouldn't recommend it.
Okay. Well, first off, thanks for getting that. Any questions for Gary on that conversation?
Thank you, Gary, for getting that info. Mhm.
All right, so with that information, do we want to talk Board of Ed tonight, or do we want to punt this one for further reflection? I'm comfortable either way.
I like to hear what everybody else thinks.
I'll go last.
I like the idea.
I know, Don, you like the idea, correct?
I do. Yeah. I think that what's going on between, the administration and the Board of Ed has been just a pox, for years. And there's got to be a better way. I'm not sure the Berlin, again, that was all news to me. That's the first real information I had about it other than what I've read. Doesn't sound like a good idea to have annual elections. But I like the idea. Seems now that you got a situation where basically, I don't know how many people are in the local political parties, but you put 20, 30 people in a room and they determine basically who the Board of Education is going to be. Certainly the Democratic Party does, because they've got a minority representation of 4, so they pick 4 and they're in. That's the antithesis of, a democracy. I mean, that's, it just strikes me that there would be some really good people over time that would participate. Might create more debate, which people typically don't want once they get established, but I think that's probably a good thing too. So,
I've been trying to debate this in my mind, Don, a little bit. If, when you're running with a party, you kind of have a little bit of a structure. Campaigns are not free. You have to spend money to kind of get your name out there. So if you're doing this, you're gonna, let's just say you had 9 people running, they're gonna have 9 different committees, which they'd have to have a treasurer. They all have to, come up with a platform or a message, and they're going to get that out to all, 20,000 of our voters to kind of make an informed decision. Or is it basically, is the luck of the draw by the, who's first on the ballot? Or will the political parties, kind of, spend their money and who they want anyway? I just don't, and I just kind of like to discuss it, with some more people to try to figure out, does this make any sense? I mean, I kind of see this, that if this happened, I could see where you'd have no minority representation possibly.
Is there ever an independent on the ballot?
Well, yeah, they could be, because you don't know what they are. You're basically saying, my name is John Smith, and that's it. There's no, there's no R, D, I, U, whatever you want.
I've never seen, I don't think I've ever seen it on the ballot. An independent.
No, you have.
Board of Ed.
Oh yeah, in fact, we had them.
We have. Well, then I just don't recall.
Yeah, wasn't there a Citizen Action Party not too long ago? Citizens United.
Yeah.
Were they independent though?
They were an independent. They were an independent group. In fact, I believe they had 2 or 3 members on the Board of Aldermen, and they may have had 1 or 2 on the.
Or an unaffiliated person.
Well, in other words, the way I understood it, somebody can go out in this particular case, it was get 1% of the vote. What was it? You petition to get on the ballot.
Correct.
There's no party structure. Somebody good says, I want to do this. I want to make a difference, and decides they're not going to, don't want to go through the party thing, and they step forward. And it seems to me that's how you can really mine for gold.
No, I know that, but I think the parties could recommend also, so that they can nominate.
Right.
So they can nominate, let's say 3 people. So they got 3 of them go on the board, and then the Democrats nominate 3 people, and then any independent would just get 100 signatures, and they would go on the board on the ballot, and there would be, let's say, 8 or 9 people running, and the top 3 win.
How many people, let me ask you a question, because you understand this far better than me. When people go in to vote for members of the Board of Ed, how many people really know who, other than that, the top row is the Republicans, the second row is the Democrats?
They don't. I mean, how do you know how somebody's gonna vote unless they're vetted somehow?
But I mean, people I don't even know the names.
Right.
Well, it's typically name recognition. That's why they spend so much money on signs.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that, you know, does that dictate your philosophy? You know, or
No.
if you were gonna run, Don, and you're gonna put your name up, you know, are you gonna basically say, here's, you know, how I'm thinking and, you know,
Yeah,
politics is based on 30 seconds.
Yeah,
Have you?
this is where I always go back to, like, so again, anecdotal, but my days running for the state Senate, right? Like, I replaced Doc Gunther, who was there for 40 years. And we did a poll when I first ran of, do you know who George Gunther was? Guy was state senator for 40 years. Only 40% of the people in the district knew who he was, right? So it's kind of like, for Board of Ed, to, you know, to answer your question, Don, is I gotta imagine it's a very small percentage of the electorate who actually knows all 10 candidates or however many candidates there are.
It's a long-term commitment. It's not something that, you know, I've used that term, washing it through the cycles. It's not something that, you know, year 2, year 3, year 4. It's a long-term re-education. You know, again, I have, the only experience I have with this is I worked for 2.5 years in a town called Normal, Illinois, and it was nonpartisan. And it's the home of Illinois State University. And the representative body there was the most sophisticated group I ever worked with. And I never heard the word Republican or Democrat.
Mhm.
So when I say that, I think you can get great people, you can. But, you know, it takes years and running it through and people understanding the process and being committed to a certain set of ideals. And again, I think the only, and again, we'll do whatever, but the issue is that this has been very bad for the town of Shelton. Very bad, and not representative either, because we give great education here. You know, we have great teachers, we have great facilities, and yet we're viewed as second class because of this, the horrible branding job that goes on every year around budget time.
Yes, the petty politics that's being played. And
Exactly.
I think that the voters need to determine who they want on the Board of Education, not just the political parties. It's the political parties' job to vet and to nominate people. And then I think you need a fair number of people running and let the public decide who they want.
Well,
That's where I fundamentally disagree. I don't think political parties should vet candidates for this board.
To vet.
The vet.
and
Because
here,
I don't-
good. I was going to bring, so I'm going to bring up my practical concern here, right? So my practical concern is that it goes to the fact of, do you want minority representation to be guaranteed or not?
Yeah.
Right? Because if we said, look, we want this to be as representative of the will of the people as possible, right? And we actually don't care about the partisan makeup of the Board of Ed. 4 or 6 are very valid ways to do it. I just think you're going to end up with one party dominance based on who's winning the election, you know, overall. You know, with number 6, you look at towns like Milford, where they elect by ward, and it's a 9-1 majority, right, for one party. I think if you were to look at the nonpartisan elections we have, not just in Berlin, but you got to remember the RTM is nonpartisan in Darien and Westport. And in talking with the folks who I know there, yep, Don, exactly what you said. People don't talk about parties, but it's because the Republicans control everything in Darien and the Democrats control everything in Westport. So no need to talk about parties because that's who controls those RTMs, and they just always do. Right. And so to me, I'm like, this is a question in my mind. Right. And I go back and forth about it, about, do we care as a city about ensuring that there's minority representation on there? And yes, today that looks like the Democrats, but not necessarily tomorrow. Right. And so do we want to have that kind of forced bipartisanship, right, which is what minority representation does? Or do we say, nope, we're just going to leave it up to the voters? And, you know, if they like, so this is the change journey that you're talking about, Don. If we go with the nonpartisan manner, we're going to rely on the electorate getting educated. And if not, it's going to be based on name recognition, who raises the most money. That's a valid way to do it. It's very representative. You're leaving it up to the voters, but you could end up with a 9-0 board that's controlled by one party.
Yeah, that's a good point. And again, that's been the primary argument against it. So,
So I think that the other question in my mind is, we haven't talked about idea 5, does moving to a maximum of 6 solve the problems, right? Because I think we can all, if we're being objective, agree with Don on the problems. And this is where, I don't know. I think there are arguments for a 6-3 board, given some of the things around that we've talked about with getting more people to run, because now you'll have 12 people running for 9 spots rather than 10 running for 9. I think there's arguments for it from looking at other towns where it's kind of half and half, whether they have 6-3 or 5-4 maximum splits. But I don't know if it's going to solve the rancor, right? I don't know if it's going to solve the war that has gone on. That may be based on people, may not be based on structure. So I don't like that. To your point, Don, is I don't know if any structure that we're going to do is going to solve it. And maybe it will, maybe it won't. I just don't know.
Does anybody know what Trumbull currently, how theirs is structured?
I do. Let me pull it up. Give me one
And
second.
I only asked because I was reading a little bit about their charter revision going on, and the first select woman there is proposing that they go back to 6 members with no party holding more than 3.
Oh,
So,
3-3. Interesting.
yeah, so 3-3, which kind of forces people to debate and get things done.
So Trumbull right now is a 7-person board with a max from 5 from one party, 2-year terms.
Interesting. So that must not be working either.
Well, what's the composition?
What do you mean?
Is it actually 5-2 right now, you mean?
Is it 5-2? Is it?
Or 3, yeah.
Do the Republicans control it and not? the
I don't know. I don't know.
But this is where I'm like, I think there are arguments for going to 6-3, but I just don't know if one of those arguments is we're going to solve the problem, the very real problem that Don laid out with any structure that we're going to pick.
Right.
I don't know.
Right.
I mean, I know we keep on talking state statutes. As far as I'm concerned, in reading that court case, I believe what this charter does supersedes a lot of the state statutes. And I think if we were to go for a 7-2 or 8-1, I think it would hold up. But if we're going to, kind of stick with the state guidelines, then the state guidelines call for a 6-3, and maybe that's what we do.
It's a question of, do we want minority representation or not? Because if we actually said as a group that hey, it's look, we said it on the Board of Aldermen, minority representation was not important. Let the voters have their say. If we were to say the same thing here, then to me, 4 or 6 become viable options. But if what we're saying is actually for education, we do want to make sure that there's a voice at the table for the minority party, then to me, looking at option 5 for other reasons, we're not going to solve the rancor from it, but whether it's the 2/3 policy, whether it's because we're looking at other towns who are doing that, et cetera, then it becomes viable.
But 7-2 gives them a voice. They would have a voice. That for a minimum. And that doesn't necessarily mean it couldn't be 5-4 or 6-3.
Yeah, you're maximizing.
5-4 with the Democrats controlling, which has happened in the past. But I just think that if it was 7-2, the voters would have a big, more of a say. Because when you look at the way things operate now, and just going to an extreme, you could have 6 or 7 people getting, say it was 10,000 people that voted, they got 9,000 votes. And then 6 or 7 people got 1,000 votes. You would pick 4 of the people that got 1,000 and only 5 of the people that got 9,000 votes.
Yeah,
Is that fair?
minority representation is by its very nature undemocratic with a small d, right? You're saying people with less votes beat people with more votes. And you're saying, and what, by putting minority representation in there, what we're saying is that there's something about education that makes it that we want to force some bipartisan consensus on the issue. So we're willing to be undemocratic to give the minority party representation there. And I do think there's an argument for that. I do think on education and on zoning that there, that there are arguments where you say, look, there's a reason for our community to have more voices at the table. But I also see the argument that, look, we are a democracy and the person with the most votes should win. That this is a complex issue to me that I'm like, we have to think about what's the issue we're solving for, right? The issue we're solving for is things like, hey, we want to make sure that, if the board policy requires a 2/3 vote, we want the voters to be able to choose up to 2/3 from one party. If we say we want to align with those towns that tend to have a 6-3 majority, that makes sense to me. If we're saying we're going to have a 6-3 majority and that's going to solve the town versus Board of Ed, I don't think that's true. I don't think that's gonna
No, I agree with you on that, Dan.
Whereas if we say that, hey, the heck with minority representation, we said the heck with it for the Board of Aldermen, the heck with it here, maybe nonpartisan works, maybe something like Milford works. I don't know, and maybe it should, and I'm sorry, I'm just thinking out loud now. It makes, and this is me speaking as, to be blunt, as a citizen of Shelton, not as a Republican, makes me nervous to get rid of minority representation, given the fact that Shelton has been dominated by one party for a long time. Makes me nervous, right? I think there is a role for a minority to play. Also knowing that, as John Angley said, I've been doing this for a long time. I was in the minority once in town, right? And it was nice to be able to have a voice in education and in zoning when we Republicans were in the minority. So I worry about it as a citizen, getting rid of it entirely, but I can be convinced.
Right. So then the only question would be, if you're going with that, is what is that number? So, right. So is it, if you have 9, is it 8-1 or is it 7-2, 6-3, 5-4, right?
Don't forget on the alderman, there was only one Democrat for years and it still worked.
Well, he never felt he had a voice, though. That's the problem when you get into that kind of.
That's been the last, I guess, 10 years. But prior to that, there was a time when not too distant, the Board of Aldermen was 5-3.
It was 4-4 at one point too, right?
4-4 at one point, yeah. So I mean, and that's allowing the voters to vote, and
That's true.
And this is where they'll
Yeah.
get, and I know we're just debating this out. Like, if you're going to do something that's beyond the state guidelines, I don't even know if that's going to be allowed. I know you're relying on the court case, but B, if you're going to go 8-1, what the heck? Why even have it, right? Like, if you're going to do something like that, just make it so that there's no minority representation, whether you do it by wards or on affiliate or nonpartisan. If you're going to give the minority a voice, it seems you're going to want at least 2 or 3, right? With my bias. I know you have the court case, but my bias is to stay within state statutes, is to say, do it with 6-3. It solves the 2/3 issue that we talked about with policy that gives the voters a choice. It'll increase the number of people running, right? And so it dilutes the power of the parties, right? Because right now we got 10 people typically running for 9 spots. Once you say it's 6, each party is going to run at least 6. So you'll have 12 people running for 9 spots. I think there's a lot of benefits to number 5. It's not going to solve the world, but I think there's an argument to be made there.
And the only thing that I feel pretty strongly about, and I can buy that argument, Dan, going 6-3, is that is how the voting takes place. And I think that you want to make sure that people are not, I don't like the idea that the way it's structured where you get to vote for 9. Because I think that's where the games are played. If one party could put up 6, both parties should put that 6 up and then vote for no more than that number.
More than 6, right? That's something I got to bring you examples because some towns do that, right? I think in addition to structure, we have to talk about that, and we have to talk about 2-year versus 4-year terms. But I don't know, a couple of us have been talking a lot. What other people think? Darlissa, what do you think?
Well, number one, I think the voice of the people should be heard. I've talked to a lot of people about this, and they're very upset that people are sitting on this current board who don't represent them, and they feel as though their vote was for nothing. Why did they get out? Why did they support people, vote for the people they wanted? And then they ended up with people who don't have any background in the Board of Ed or education at all. And they're very upset over that. So to that end of it, I think, yes, you're right, your vote should count. But I can understand having some minority representation because each party has a different platform. And I think diversity could be a good thing. I'm leaning more towards the 7-2 because people are absent. And if you still need a 2/3 vote, I think that would be a doable, keep the board moving ahead. But I have no problem at all with 6-3. I think that would do it as well. But the other confusing point that I've heard from voters is how it's placed on the ballot. This past election year was very confusing for many of the voters, and they really didn't understand how to vote for a Board of Ed. And that has to be clarified and made simpler. So I also don't think having no party is good because having been a candidate for several years, it's expensive. You need party support. You need support, both financially and a platform. When people see you belong to a certain party, even if they don't know you, they have in their mind, okay, the party puts you up, therefore you stand for this, this, and this. They do have preset notions about what you stand for. And you can either, hopefully build upon that or adjust it accordingly. But I think it's very important. And even if you are undecided or an independent, that still says something to the voting public. So I do think we need to have a party a party line. That's about it for now, I guess.
Ruth Ann and Dave, what do you guys think?
Well, being an unaffiliated or an independent, though I tend to lean one way or the other, I don't feel that, I don't think those people get represented in the voting. And I think there's a lot of unaffiliated or independents in the town of Shelton that don't have anybody that's, that's up against, that's voting, that's on their side, so to speak. You can't vote in the primary. You can't vote in the primary. You can't, you can't do this, can't do that. So I say either no affiliation, or you've got to, or go by board. Those people are voting for the, the people in your area or in your, your ward, and that should solve it.
Great. Dave, what do you think?
Well, I certainly do believe in minority representation. I'm not so sure that I'm convinced about what that breakdown of the numbers should be. I also like the idea of keeping it with a party affiliation, because although what Don had mentioned before did make a lot of sense to me, I think that I would assume that as the electorate going in to vote is going to pick the individual that they want based upon a particular ideology or philosophy of a party they're associated with. So to take away that designation, to me, I don't know. I don't know what other form they could use, or information they could use to decide, other than obviously severely educating themselves insofar as who the candidates are.
Got it. And Ruth, what do you think?
Oh, well, going back to, I'm sorry, the other Ruth, okay.
Yeah, we'll go back to you, Ruth.
That's right.
People call me Ruth too.
Go ahead, Ruth Ann.
Well, I was just gonna say on the minority representation, I do think there should be some minority representation. I agree, whether it's 7-2 or 6-3. I'm probably leaning towards 6-3, but I could go either way on that one. Sorry, Ruth, go ahead.
No, yeah, and I guess I'm coming back to what is it that we're trying to solve? Like what?
Yeah, I can answer what I'm trying to solve. It's a good question, Ruth. And so I think that like, because I go back to if we could solve the problem that Don laid out, which is the most fundamental problem, right? Which is to solve the rancor between City Hall and the Board of Education. There's a structural way to do that. We could. To Gary's point before, I think most towns have a level of that. Ours is a little exceptional. And I don't know if any of these are going to solve that, right? I don't know if any of these are going to solve that. My personal belief is based a lot on personalities who have been over the years, not structure. So what I'm solving for here is there's two things. One is there is the ability for voters to have power over parties. And going to and we can debate the number, 6-3 is what the state guideline is. I worry about us going past that, but it will increase the number of people running for slots. So rather than 10 people running for 9 slots, which has happened every year except for the past one, it goes to, in the case of 6, it'll go to 12 people running for 9 spots. More democratic, more inclusive, small d. It also solves what I see to be a paradox of to change something at the Board of Education requires a 2/3 vote, yet, and this was the question I asked Kate, yet we're forcing a 5-4 majority, but then requiring a 6-3 majority to actually get something done. To me, that doesn't make sense. It should be aligned one way or the other. And so to me, those are the problems we're solving if we do number 5. If you do number 4 and number 6, the problem you're solving is you're basically saying, I don't want minority representation. I either want, in the case of 4, I want to go on this journey that Don talked about to go to a truly nonpartisan world where people are voting on the people, not the parties. Or in the case of number 6, you're saying, I actually believe that A, we don't need minority representation, and B, I like having some local representation. There actually is something to having somebody from my ward who cares about Booth Hill School and is going to fight for Booth Hill School there. I think we heard that last argument. I think we heard from both sides of the aisle, from both Jim and Kate, that that's not a real thing, that last issue. But I'm trying to answer your question. If you pick different ones of these, what are you solving for? Did I say that right? Do people disagree?
Yes. No, I understood you. Thank you. There's multiple things we're trying to solve, right? So it's not just one issue that we're trying to solve. So this is a really off the wall question, and you may all think I'm really crazy, but is there any way that you can create a board that has independence on it, that includes an independent party? So somebody from one, somebody from another, and you have to have 2 independents or something of that, because we all know, as Darlissa spoke to before, you need support. When you're running, you can't do it on your own. You need party support. And we have more independents in this town than we have either
Correct.
ours or
And I
Dems.
didn't say that before. Right.
So is there any way that, because that could possibly bring balance to a board that's, I don't know. I'm just throwing that out there. I don't know if it's ever been done, if it can be done.
Yeah, I'm actually looking. There was some board that did something like that. It wasn't a Board of Ed though. I think it was, yeah. So it was the planning and zoning, they did that. So they didn't do it with Board of Ed, but Ansonia actually had on their planning and zoning, and I'm trying to confirm that they're an appointed board, but they forced 2 Rs, 2 Ds, and a U. right? So that they force that there. And that's in charter that there's, they actually spell out the parties too, which I didn't see anyplace else. Most places don't mention the parties. So it has been done. I don't know if we would, do 4-4,
Embrace that.
something like that, right? I don't know.
There was that bill that was brought up by Senator Duff that would allow the first selectman or the mayor to pick the chairman of the Board of Education. I haven't spoken to him or really anybody on this, but I'm just wondering if the idea behind this bill is for communication. And if the first selectman or the mayor were to pick the chairman of the Board of Education, would that improve communication? And does that solve the problem that we're seeing here?
I think it would exacerbate the problem here.
What?
What, did you say why?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, well, because I think you got two, I think you talk about ideological rifts between parties. Let's talk about the ideological rift between Board of Education and administration.
Yeah, and so it's, and I guess you get it in a lot of towns, but at least if the mayor or whomever had to pick the chairman, he would pick somebody that he could at least
Work with.
have a conversation with.
That could change too, though.
Right. And that's what
It would change every 2 years.
Yeah. But this is where I'm
No,
like,
I meant the relationship could change quickly.
Of course. But we're not coming up with a charter based on the personalities
correct.
that are in
You're right.
office.
You're absolutely right.
And that's why I'm like, if to Ruth's point, if that's the problem we're solving for, I don't know if we're going to come up with a structural solution to it. You look at the history of the last 20 years, not just recent history, and there have been boards where City Hall and the Board of Education got along. There have been boards where they didn't, and most recently violently didn't. And by the way, none of that was a party issue. There was one party in control of both sides, and that still was rancorous, right? So I'm like, I really don't think we're going to solve that issue with any of these proposals.
I think when you talk to educators, and I hesitate to say this, we're talking to two right now who understand this, but I've lived with one forever. Let me just tell you, they're passionate about what they do. Okay, saying when you talk to public administrators, many of them aren't passionate about education. They're passionate about protecting the purse, but educators care about the other teachers. They care about the students.
Thank you, Don.
Cry a lot.
Someone had to say it.
So, you talk about an ideological rift. I would rather see a very robust Board of Education and a very robust administrative arm talking to one another on the same page. And I guess going to your point, Dan, if nonpartisan is not palatable, I like the 6-3 because I default to the idea of electing more people fairly. I think the nonpartisan does it. Now you can argue, and Gary made the argument, it's a good one. Other people have made it. It can lead to one-party domination, but at least people are electing. I default to that. So I would go with the 6-3, wouldn't go below that. Or again, preferably nonpartisan, but again, if that's not palatable.
So I'm with you on that, Don. I don't want to go below 6-3, both from a state statute standpoint, it's what they recommend. I don't want to get into areas where the charter is being challenged because whoever the minority party is feels like it's not viable. I also look at other towns, right? To Darlis and Gary's point, no other town goes as far as to do 7-2. So like my comfort level is kind of where Don's is based on his last statement, which is I'm comfortable with number 5 with a 6-3 number, but probably not more than that.
Well, I think it's, important for us as a group to be united if we could. And so I'll agree with that.
I agree with that too. Ruth Ann speaking.
Is that where we're developing consensus on? Ruth, Dave? Looking
I
Yes,
think so.
Darlisa?
Melissa?
Mhm.
Okay, well then, let's mark this again. It's not speak now or forever hold your peace. Let's reject these two. Accept it with 6-3. And again, if anybody changes their mind on this one, and obviously this will get public, this will definitely get public opinion. We're going to hear more about this. So this is not the final say on this, but this is where we are right now. Got it. And so given that, do we want to talk about, and I skipped it before because I wanted to talk about it in conjunction with this, the 2-year versus the 4-year. Do we want to talk about that, or do we want to punt that for another time? 2-year versus 4-year terms on the Board of Ed.
Staggered?
Staggered, right? If you went, I agreed. We could do something like the 3-3-3. I don't like that personally. I like keeping it in odd numbered years where it is aligned with the rest of the municipal elections. But do we want, like, there's again, I think on P and Z, we're seeing that is a statute issue, not a philosophy issue. Whereas in the Board of Ed, if you actually look at other towns, they are all over the place. Some are 2, some are 4, some are 3. So I think there is a wiggle room if we wanted to change that.
I like to punt on that right now.
Yeah, that's fair. We've been going a long time too. We just did a big one, so. Okay. So is anybody object to punting? Anybody want to talk about it tonight?
No, good.
Okay.
I'm good.
Coming down here, then we'll finish the swing. The fire commission and fire marshal stuff. I actually think that, like, we have it to go back and talk to some folks. I'd like to punt on that because I haven't talked about it yet. I think we have some dispositions, right? We had a favorable disposition on the fire commissioners being from Shelton. We had this question about the rank. Commissioners shall be equal in rank and authority. Just haven't had a chance to ask Chick about what he meant by that. We had a favorable disposition towards the fire marshal. We just wanted to talk to the chief and make sure there aren't going to be unintended consequences for that. So let's punt on that so we can have those conversations.
Hey, Dan, I talked to my father-in-law, Chuck Sutton,
Yeah.
who was, a long time, I guess he's been a member of the fire department for probably 60 years or better. And he's been a fire commissioner, head of the fire commissioners, assistant chief. And I asked him on that, was it number 10 or 11? About, the fire commissioners. And in his view, it was kind of simple. He said that he thought it was kind of a no-brainer that people should be from Shelton. He said, theoretically, you could have 5 members of the commission all being from out of town voting on our tax issues, on spending issues, because they recommend to the mayor, what the budget is, and they recommend, purchasing of equipment. So, theoretically, you could have people, everybody from out of town talking about our budgetary issues. So he felt pretty strongly that they should be Shelton electors.
Commissioners.
let's go
Yeah.
ahead.
They
That's a
should be,
very
they
good
should,
point.
they should be, from Shelton,
Resident, yeah.
resident, elector, whatever you want to call it. Yes.
And this is where, like, look, yeah, I tend to agree, right? Like, I'm in that camp as well. I just want to talk to a few more people, right? Like, I just like, this was we reached such a delicate balance with the fire department in the last charter revision commission. I still want to kick a hornet's nest, and I don't think this is. I
don't think so either.
I don't think it is. I just want to talk to a couple more people to make sure it's not. I just haven't talked to enough people yet. And that's just me as a commissioner personally. I want to make sure we're doing something that everyone goes, yep, that makes sense. Right. And same thing with the fire marshal, right? The fire marshal to me makes theoretically all the sense in the world to have this. It's just another employee that the mayor should appoint. Again, I just want to make sure we're not kicking up a hornet's nest there, and there's somebody's going to go, no way, that's got to be with the fire commission because of X, Y, and Z and reasons I haven't thought of. So I just want to punt on these ones till I get to have those conversations. That's just me as a commissioner.
Okay.
And if everyone else feels strongly about it, like my mind is kind of there on 11 and 13. I expect to get 12. I don't get what impact that's going to have, so I want to ask about it. But again, if people feel strongly, I'm not going to because I'm with you on it. I just want to do a double check. So are people okay punting those for now, or do you guys want to?
Agreed.
Yeah.
Yep.
All right, then we got two new ones here that we just haven't talked about yet. So the first one is the one we talked about tonight with John. And so wanted to get your guys' reaction to the idea for the technology committee, because you really put a lot of meat on the bones there in terms of composition and powers, et cetera, et cetera.
Well, I was the one that initially brought that up because I really believe this is of the time and it is of the future. And I think it needs to be addressed. We have to have something somewhere for people to start. Of course, things will change because technology changes so rapidly, but I think it's a good idea to go ahead with it. And I like a lot of ideas that John had put out, especially the composition of the committee. It seemed very fair to me.
So
I think what they would be in charge of to get plans going and to have checks and balances with an eye towards the budget is also a good idea.
other thoughts?
I think it'd be interesting to talk to Mark and see what the scope of a committee like that would be in town. Obviously, it would go well beyond, it could potentially go well beyond, computers or.
Yeah, and this is, if you're giving them money, right? If you're going to have a referendum that gives them a big pot of bonded money, it's a very powerful committee, right? This is not a light thing that we're creating. It's not an advisory board. You're giving them authority to actually spend money, right? That, John did not recommend a check from the Board of Aldermen. I also like the other thing. So I personally like the idea. The only thing I worry about is I totally get where John's coming from in terms of the composition. It's kind of against the movement that we made in other areas, right? We were standardizing everything with mayor appoints, Board of Aldermen approves. This one we've kind of said, well, we're going to have the Board of Ed appoint some, and we're going to have the aldermen appoint some, and the mayor appoint some, and the IT directors, which all makes logical sense. It's just we are setting up something different here if we go down that direction than every place else where we standardize. And I might be okay with that. I just haven't thought about. I saw John's thing for the first time today, so I haven't thought about it.
I'm not sure, and I could be wrong, that John knows exactly what we have said about being consistent. But I kind of think that we should kind of stay consistent in what we're trying to do as far as appointments. And the only difference here would be maybe the Board of Education's chairman would recommend, the mayor would recommend X, and then the Board of Aldermen, approve it.
Right.
I like the concept of getting a lot of great minds together and not just leaving it in the hands of an IT employee. I think the composition may be a little too large or unwieldy to get things done. So I think, but in concept, I like the idea.
And I'm not sure that the IT employees should be voting members.
Right.
I would agree
Right.
with that.
Right.
So this is, I have the same question I always do, which is, again, I didn't look at this when I was looking at other towns, but how do other towns do it? Right? It's like, are there technology committees in other towns under their appointed commissions? So I think we all like the idea. I think we
Yeah.
got questions on scope, how we constitute it, and powers. And so let me take it as a to-do to look at, John's got a proposal. It's a very reasonable proposal. Let's see how other towns do it and revisit. But I think we all like the idea.
Good.
Yeah.
And then the other one that we brought up, where I think, again, we all kind of like the idea, but need to look at specifics, is the Architectural Review Committee, kind of an adjunct to P&Z.
So I want to rescind my comment that I thought it would be a good idea.
Okay.
I did a little research on architectural review boards, and technically they're put together for areas of historic significance or homeowners associations, like a cluster housing where people might want to put on an addition. So you come up with a set of standards that are specific to that application. But you also, so you create standards, and then you have, you certainly need architectural expertise on that board because it's an architectural review board. So to find a volunteer architect to serve on a board like that, I'm not sure would be easy to do. But I also think that on a committee such as that, you're not going to have just a board of architects. You're going to have people that are going to have personal preferences, personal tastes, what they like, what they don't like, who likes Georgian style, who likes this, who likes glass in the windows, who doesn't. So I think it's just going to add another level of bureaucracy onto the planning and zoning process. So I think it's just going to be just as subject to personal opinion as what currently occurs on the board of planning and zoning board. So I'm rescinding my thought that it would be a good idea. Open for other comments though.
Really, this is, the point of this is towns use this when they have a feel that they want to enforce, right? Like, I want this section of town to look like this, right? And so therefore we want to put this in, versus something more general where everything goes through it, or just like, how is it used? I'm not familiar with these at all.
So some of the towns that I knew had it no longer have them, because I think they were just running into this exact same situation where you just have personal preferences on the board, and it just belabors the process of getting permits for, whatever it is you're trying to do. In homeowner associations, it makes sense without a doubt. You've got, you could, if you're in a historic area, you could dictate the type of window treatments, et cetera. And the Planning and Zoning Commission does that to some extent, like when I recall when we were doing the apartments downtown, and there's a lot of people that don't feel the architecture that's going up currently matches what was there. But nobody builds everything of all brick anymore. So that's where you would, like, if you had a downtown district where everything was brick, and there are historic districts of much more significance than what we have here. Ours is really an old manufacturing historic district down on Canal Street, that sort of thing. So some of the buildings can't be saved, or they'd be too costly to. So I don't know that Shelton really has any area like that that would be relative to having an architectural review board.
Got it. Other thoughts on this one?
Darlisa, I think, Ruth, you bring up some very valid points. And I think P&Z is a very busy board, very complex, and I don't think we want to add more layers of mud to the puddle.
Well, then I was also reminded there is a downtown subcommittee, and that is one of their purviews, is to review applications specifically for the downtown area. So they kind of, I would say, semi-act like they have no voting authority. They have no, they refer things back to the Planning and Zoning Commission, but they meet with developers that are proposing projects downtown. I assume that subcommittee is still in effect.
But that's only downtown?
That's only downtown, correct?
Okay. So, does anybody want to keep this idea alive? I don't feel strongly about this one way or the other. I'm in a learning mode about this, but Ruth came out pretty strongly against this, made a pretty convincing argument. Does anybody want to look at this and keep it alive? It was a new idea from last time.
I think maybe for the next charter revision, we could look at that.
The next one in
Yeah,
10 years?
10 years.
10 years?
10 years, 10 years from now, when
That's a pretty good
and
point.
we have all these new space age things going on, then we may have to look at it.
True.
But I think if we have the downtown committee, that kind of covers it.
Yeah, I had
Um,
forgotten about them, to be honest with you.
And I just don't think P and Z needs an extra chore.
Okay, is anybody gonna make an argument to keep this one alive? Because otherwise I'm gonna put it in the reject column. Okay, I'm gonna reject that one. All right, and then under general, things I owe you, we wanted to get better title for administrative assistant. We want to see what other towns do. I'm gonna get that to you. Add a preamble, wanted to see what other towns do. Again, I'm just gonna copy and paste them into a Word document for you guys for next time, so you can see and see what you like, what you don't like. That was it. Those are the ideas that we.
Okay.
So we got through a lot tonight. I want to continue, if it's okay with everybody, going into May on a weekly schedule. So to kind of work backwards from where we need to get is like, would love to get this in the alderman's hands by July 4th. We have to have a second public hearing, right? So that would probably be in the last 2 weeks of June. We need to have time for the for Corporation Council to look over our specific language. So I'm going to sync up with Jack Basher to make sure we can get Corporation Council's time in early June. So that kind of gives us May to finalize these decisions and write something up. And what I want to do is, going in May, I want to start parallel pathing. We obviously have some ideas to actually finish up. But what I want to do is I want us to start, and if it's okay with everyone, I will do this much the way that we've done other things, is because we can do this one of two ways. Either one is we can all do it real time, right? And we can literally go through the charter and do the language together. We're going to need more than one meeting a week to do that. Or if people are comfortable, I can take the pen and come in with a suggestion based on what we've talked about, and you guys can react to it.
I like your latter idea. Go for it.
From that, just from I'm meeting standpoint, but again, I wanted to keep the option. I don't want to take the pen if people aren't comfortable with me doing a first draft and then us reviewing.
Hey, Dan, are you gonna be able to get that? I know it's, you're putting it on yourself, but you got to give us like what, a day to read it or something like that?
Yes. More than a day, right? Like, this is one where, like, what I want to do is take what we have already and put it in a document, right? We still got things that we're deciding on, and get that out for people to read a week in advance, right? Like, so I want to hurry up and get that done and get it out to folks, because I don't want to be talking about that real time. I want you all to have read it, have edits, suggestions, and then we walk through it together. So, but I just think we need to do, given the timing, we need to do that in parallel with finishing up the ideas that we have. I just want to make sure everyone's okay with that before I took pen to paper.
I mean, there's 8, looking at the charter, there's 8 chapters. I mean, and probably the first 4 or 5 go pretty quick. And then you got, 6, 7, and 8, which are kind of pages.
Right. Again, and I'm not, like I said, me, I don't have to be the only one with the pen. If other people want to take cut sections, I'm absolutely fine with that. I just don't know if it's an efficient use of our time for us all to do it together, rather than somebody takes a version 1 and then we react to it.
I
I
like
think for
that idea.
consistency, I think it should be one person doing that. Not to put the onus on you, but
I don't
would
mind it,
certainly,
right?
would
Like,
certainly help, but I just think for consistency, it would work better.
I agree. And thank you, Dan, for volunteering.
Yes, absolutely.
yay
Hey,
for
Dan, I do have a question on your timing, though. You had indicated having a public hearing mid to late June. That may not be practical. It looks like now they're they may start thinking about opening up the state sometime in June, but slowly. So I don't know that we'd be able to, unless we can do some sort of WebEx or webinar, whatever they call them, WebEx, where people could call in and there would be slides on the, a presentation via slides, and then people could call in. There's a moderator that would let people speak. So that it is an alternative, but it's something we'd have to plan for and allow enough time to plan it.
Agreed. The answer is I don't know, right? Like, I think we have to look into that. There's certainly other committees and commissions with public participation that are going on around the state right now, maybe even here in Shelton. I don't know how the Board of Aldermen or the Board of Education are handling it. So I think we just need to look into that, because we might not be able to do it live. It's a good point.
And I don't know if the city has the technology.
Oh, that's a
That's
good
why I
one,
said
Ruth.
we'd have to allow time.
All right, gang. Well, late meeting today, but we got a lot done. So we'll keep going Mondays at 7. And if we need more meetings in May, we'll get more meetings in May. But I think the once a week should be sufficient for the pace we're going at. Thank you all. Good meeting tonight.
Dan, can I
Agreed.
just
Thank
ask,
you.
Dan, can I just ask with the upcoming agendas, can I just do it the same, like general discussion?
This will continue to be workshops until we hit the point that we start voting, when then we'll have formal meetings again, right? But right now we're continuing just to, we're moving from passing around ideas to now passing around language. So none of this is ever speak now or forever hold your peace until we go back to meetings. And that's where we'll go back to formal Robert's Rules of Order. People can offer amendments if they want. Success to me is that we've done all our work and we've come to consensus. And so those meetings become perfunctory, that we've debated all these ideas in the workshops. But that is the point where we'll go back to formal agendas and Robert's rules.
Yeah, I just want to put them on so that this way they're on the web to say that there's workshops going on. And it's going to be 3 Mondays because the last one is Memorial Day.
Good point. Good point. And so let's just do those 3 Mondays out right now, and maybe we'll do a different day next week. If I assume nobody's taking vacation for or going anyplace for the weekend.
I was supposed to be in Hawaii, but that's another story.
Oh,
Aw.
Oh, it stinks, Ruth. Well, Shelton's nice this time of year.
Minus the sandy beaches.
Yes. All right, gang. Thank you as always. Can I hear a motion to adjourn?
So
motion.
moved.
All right, motion by Ruth Ann, second by Darlis. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And thank you, Sophia, for all the work you're doing.
Yes.
Yes.
Did everyone get my email today? There was somebody that gave.
Yes.
Okay,
We did get.
Yes, did see it.
Camp. Yes.
okay. All right, guys, good night.
Thanks,
Good
guys.
night.
Good night, everyone.
See you next
Stay safe.
week.